Today, we rediving into Untold Stories, air traffic control in combat zones. A work that pulls back the curtain on one of the lesser-known but critical roles in modern warfare, coordinating the skies where combat, logistics, and fragility meet. This is not a book about fighter jets or headline battles. Instead, it takes us into the nerve center, behind the scenes, the air traffic controllers who operate in war zones. Managing aircraft from resupply deliveries to medevacs to combat air patrols, ensuring that thousands of feet of altitude, split-second timing, and life or death converge with precision. What struck me first is how the author balances technical fidelity and human narrative. He doesn't shy away from detail frequencies, radar sweeps, communication protocols, but always frames them through human decisions, stress, and risk. We'll walk through a few dimensions: scope and structure, design of the narrative, technical detail versus readability, key takeaways and unique features, plus some critique and overall impressions. The book is organized roughly by theater and by case study. You get a sense of shifting environments: desert, mountain, urban, war zones. In each setting, you see how controllers must adapt to limited infrastructure, threats to radar sites, electronic warfare, unpredictable air traffic loads, and rapidly changing ground conditions. A core strength is the first-hand accounts. Controllers, pilots, logistics crews. Many chapters are built around interviews or transcripts. That injects You hear the crackle of static. You sense the rush when an aircraft is inbound with a damaged wing, or when a shift change leaves the radar blind spot exactly when multiple aircraft are crossing. On the performance operational side, the book delves into how controllers manage conflict with incomplete or unreliable data. In benign airspace, you'd have multiple radar feeds, primary and secondary surveillance, ADS-B, multilateration. But in combat zones, sometimes you lose one radar, or your transponder returns are jammed, or power constraints force you to alternate systems. The book explains fallback modes, procedural control, manual position reporting, use of radio voice pedantic but gripping when stakes are high. The author also discusses how time latency, separation, minima, how far apart aircraft must remain, and vectoring get compressed in wartime. You'll read about stacking patterns in constrained approach sectors or quick reroutes when a ground threat emerges. One design element worth noting is how the narrative alternates perspective. A chapter might begin in the tower or ground control room, then shift to the pilot's microphone, then to the broader air operations command. That gives a 360 feel. You see the pressure from both sides of the radio. Visually or in a video companion, you'd want overlays, radar scopes, communication logs, altitude corridors, simplified maps, maybe even replays of sector splits. The author includes maps and annotated diagrams in the book, which help readers or viewers follow the flow of air corridors, restricted zones, and conflict overlays. One of the unique selling points is that this is not a glorified military aviation memoir, nor purely a technical manual. It occupies the middle ground. For readers with some knowledge of aviation or military operations, the finer points of radar failure modes, degraded communications, and procedural contingencies scenarios are satisfying. But for less technical audiences, the human stories, the decisions under stress, the moments of silence before an approaching unknown aircraft anchor the more abstract sections. Another strength. The author doesn't gloss over failures. There are moments when miscommunication or radar blackout nearly cause mid-air conflicts. Those episodes are analyzed with what went wrong broken down. That provides useful, if sobering, lessons about redundancy, verification, and human factors. You learn that even in perfect conditions, ATC is a game of managing risk in a war zone. That margin shrinks. The narrative also touches on technological evolution, before and after upgrades. How new systems secure radios, better radar resilience, data links altered controller tactics. You see how older analog systems forced reliance on backups and improvisation, while more modern digital networks can reduce load, though in contested areas. Even advanced equipment is vulnerable to jamming, attack, or power failure. One of my favorite sections describes a makeshift control tower set up in a forward base where the controller had to route UAVs, troop transports, helicopters, and a combat fighter sortie all through the same narrow air corridor, while parts of the radar were offline. The tension is real, One misread frequency change, and the separation buffer vanishes. From a performance perspective, the book underscores not just the ability to do it, but to sustain operations under attrition, staff fatigue, shift rotation, equipment wear and tear, supply constraints, spare parts, power, cooling. It's not glamorous, but that continuous operational strain is what shapes the real story. For a video version, you might pause at sections that contrast textbook ATC in peaceful airspace versus the combat zone variant. You could show side-by-side diagrams of radar coverage drops, alternate routing, degraded comms, and then walk through a tactical decision point, which aircraft to vector first. How to resolve conflicting inbound flight paths. How to instruct a pilot to shift to a fallback frequency, or what to do when a transponder fails. In terms of pacing, the author does well to intersperse tension arcs with explanatory sidebars. So a chapter might open with a crisis, a plane losing comms, or a surface threat arriving near the airfield, then flash back to how the sector was built, what hardware was in use, the backups, and the decision logic. Critically, there are moments where the density of jargon slows the pace. Terms like SSR, secondary surveillance, radar, CPDLC, controller pilot data link, procedural waypoints, altitude buffers, sectors, STCA, short-term conflict alert, and so on. If the reader or viewer lacks a baseline, those sections may drag. In a video, it would be wise to overlay simpler definitions or side captions when such terms appear. Another critique. Occasionally, the book assumes certain knowledge, e.g., how radar gating works, or flight levels versus altitude in feet or meters. In a video adaptation, you might need small, quick, explicable interludes. Here as how radar returns are filtered, or this is what separation minima mean. Also, the focus is heavily Western coalition environments. If one hoped for deeper coverage from the NATO or NUS theaters, that is somewhat limited. But given the difficulty of access and declassification, the selections are understandable. Throughout, the balance is steady. The book never turns into an academic paper, but nor is it over. It respects the complexity. That's what makes it valuable. It can appeal to a military buff, an aviation enthusiast, or even just a curious viewer who wants to understand how war is fought behind the scenes. In terms of visual narrative for a video, imagine cutting between archival images of aircraft, control towers, radar scopes, annotated maps, radio logs, intercom, audio, and even leaning into tense, ambient sound radios, beeps, static. Use voiceover excerpts from controller transcripts, if copyright allows, to ground audiences in real radio exchanges. As you walk viewers through one case study, forward the timeline step by step, initial routing, incoming traffic, thread radio that forces fallback communications, controller juggling priorities, resolution, pause occasionally to explain the decision tree. If you had to inbound with minimal spacing, which do you vector first and why? Show the logic visually. Altitude, corridors, separation buffers, conflict zones. One of the unique selling points is that this is effectively a hidden backbone story. Most people think of pilots, aircraft, weapons, battlefield tactics, but air traffic control under fire is a margin that if it fails, everything else unravels. It is also a story of improvisation, resilience, and ingenuity, controllers building ad hoc radar nets, using portable radios, alternating frequencies, or even guiding aircraft by radio when primary systems are down. Another selling point, relevance beyond war. As unmanned aerial systems, contested airspace, and cyber threats rise, the lessons here carry into future conflicts. The book implicitly argues for robust redundancy, human-in-the-loop verification, and designing systems that can degrade gracefully rather than collapse catastrophically. When wrapping up each reviewed segment, you can compare in peacetime. Controllers rely on continuous radar feed, automatic conflict alert tools, and stable communications. In combat zones, they must anticipate failure, lean heavily on procedural control, manage uncertainty, and recover from partial data loss, all while the clock is ticking. In sum, this work stands out because of its blend, technical detail with human storytelling. depth without becoming inaccessible, and subjects rarely covered in mainstream military narrative. If you were to produce a video, pacing around the more technical chapters, splitting them and layering in graphics, maps, and voiceover interludes will help retain viewer engagement.